you'd be surprised. What I'd say is, like, don't necessarily believe everything that you read.
Hello, my name is Sarah. I'm a small artist and I'm definitely not wearing a wig right now. This is Justice for Artists. Just Stop Oil is a protest group based in the UK, but with programs that span across the globe. Their mission, as you may imagine, is to stop the usage of fossil fuels. According to a representative of the organization, the burning of fossil fuels accounts for over 75% of greenhouse emissions and nearly 90% of all carbon dioxide emissions. Climate change has already done irreversible damage to the planet, and new licensing in the UK is promoting more of that. We need to at least slow that rate down. That is an obtainable goal if people are willing to make a change. I extensively studied this organization and their demands by digging into their website and social media mentions, researching climate change, listening to hours of podcasts regarding the organization, which include interviews and evaluations from different angles. I registered and participated in an interactive video call with the organization. I watched a lot of news interviews where the protesters used the publicity to their advantage to spread their message. Okay, I did all the work, so you don't have to. There are many movements and demonstrations orchestrated by Just Stop Oil that have surfaced to the public eye. The most famous one being soup thrown at Van Gogh's sunflowers. Protesters wear neon orange to draw attention to their protest as a whole and therefore the cause behind it. Given any chance that they get via interviews, they speak about their cause and make sure to use that platform to spread information. Here are some excerpts from podcasts I listened to regarding the organization. These first clips are from Sci-Guy's episode 240.
What the hell? It is happening at a scale where we can see it, but it's just slow enough that if you don't want to see it, you don't have to. Because this year isn't that much hotter than last year, which isn't that much hotter than last year, but this year is definitely way hotter than 10 years ago.
A little bit of background of what we're going to be looking at in this first podcast. This is a podcast where two guys talk about science. They decide on subjects to discuss and then go in depth to a lot of what's behind those issues. Some of what we're going to hear is them talking about how oil companies can be very deceptive because they know this is how they're making money. If people are against them making money, because money makes the world go round.
The thing is that, you know, the government is genuinely probably quite scared that these protests are going to cause actual change that is not good for their pockets. And fundamentally cracking down on protests, if you see a government doing that, you should be worried, because that means that they know people have a point, probably, right? Like, you're not going to crack down on this stuff if you don't want to, like, limit it. And if you want to limit it, there's a reason behind that.
They also address a kind of perspective on, yes, this protest is inconveniencing other people. Yes, this protest is causing problems and getting in people's way. But they're trying to bring attention to the fact that these problems are nothing compared to what we're going to be dealing with in a few years if we don't start slowing this down.
You know, we're going to have far worse problems if we don't stop this climate catastrophe. You know, you see Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain and Extinction Rebellion do these massive protests, and they're like, and people are like, well, this is disruptive, this is impacting my everyday life, this is a problem. What they're doing is nothing in comparison to what's going to happen if we don't stop climate change. And ultimately, right now, we need to put more pressure on governments, limit the effects of climate change, because we're past the point, by the way, past the point of stopping it.
Next, we're taking a brief look at episode 44 of Alex O'Connor's Within Reason. In this podcast episode, Alex gets to interview a representative from the media side of Just Stop Oil. Here's what he had to say about the pressing issues.
We have to cause disruption in order to get this issue to the forefront of the public consciousness.
So here we hear a representative from Just Stop Oil talking about the efficacy of their methods and giving us a little bit of insight on the intent behind them.
We've tried everything else. The last 50 years, we've tried the marches, we've tried the petitions, we've tried, contacting MPs and stuff. It doesn't work, right? But I tell you what has worked in terms of like getting the media attention this last 13, 14 weeks or this last year and a half, however long you want to look at it, is disruption. I can't recall a single campaign group that has maintained this level of prevalence in the media for this amount of time. I mean, I don't want any harm to ever come to anyone. And crucially, no harm has ever come to anyone.
A controversial note in this podcast is when the interviewee uses the word genocide to describe what the government is doing, since they are knowingly bringing about the ends of lives of billions of people. And that's a big debate there, because obviously that's a very sensitive topic. That's a word that should not be thrown around lightly.
We have to accept that we have limited options available to us as normal people, right? We are up against the entire fossil fuel economy, right? They have been funneling trillions of dollars into clouding clarity around this whole issue. They are engaged in genocidal behavior, and I don't use that term lightly.
He insists that this is not something that he is throwing around lightly. This is a very serious thing, and this is how he genuinely feels about the situation. The interviewee gives us a little bit of information on the cause itself, not just the organization, and then also some of the specifically choreographed events. One thing that I noticed is common between a lot of these podcasts are people on the team of Just Stop Oil talking about how much extensive research goes into the process before they actually take action. One thing that kind of helped win me over was them talking about how in their Van Gogh demonstration, they targeted an oil painting that had a sheet of glass over it protecting the painting. In this interview, the interviewee confirms that that was something that they knew ahead of time. They didn't cause any damage, except a little bit of soup got on the frame. And a lot of people are really freaking out about that. And I mean, I kind of get it, because it's like a piece of history but I mean, they kind of have a good point. Again, we hear some discussion about the deception of the larger companies who are profiting off of burning fossil fuels. I really like what was said in that first podcast that I referenced. Just the whole concept of saying, okay, well, this year isn't a whole lot worse than last year. This year isn't a whole lot worse than the year before that. But you keep adding that up, and then it's, 10 years ago. It's since then, it's gotten so bad. But when you look at it back to back to back and you see those small increments, it's not as big of a deal. Lastly, we're taking a quick look at a brief excerpt from the Economics Explained podcast.
It only measured industrial carbon emissions, so it didn't count emissions from things like agriculture, forest fires, and regular natural decomposition, although, if anything, that just highlights that the problem is bigger than any one industry.
Now we'll discuss my experience with the interactive video call that I engaged in. Representatives and attendees have opted to remain anonymous. The representative says, the point of civil resistance is to push their ideas more towards the mainstream. Their objective as of now is to stop the production and burning of fossil fuels by 2030. Just Stop Oil took part in the Oil Kills campaign that took place over the summer, which saw over 500 ordinary people from 14 different countries across Europe, North America, Africa, engaging in camping for civil resistance at international airports. They were all demanding that government sign a fossil fuel treaty. More than 40 of these nonviolent protesters have been jailed in the UK since July, and 23 Just Stop Oil supporters still remain in prison. This is happening while UK prisons are facing an overcrowding crisis. These are people who are taking nonviolent direct action in defense of life, and they're being treated like organized criminals. They've been arrested at gunpoint, have been denied due process, and jailed for up to 4 to 5 years. It's not just undermining our movements, but it's also undermining our civil and political rights. This upcoming Friday, they're calling for a meeting with the Attorney General. The point of the protest is not to be highly disruptive. They're carefully designed to be compliant with Supreme Court legal rulings about protests. Friday's intervention will include hundreds of people sitting and blocking a roadway. They're choosing the site of the silencing and jailing of those who were imprisoned, but the main bit of evidence that was used against these people was a recorded Zoom call. It was passed to the police, and they were sentenced for up to 4 to 5 years because of conspiracy. Also on Friday, there will be the sentencing of the 2 who threw soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers. 2,800 elderly deaths could have been prevented had we acted sooner. Those are directly attributable to climate change. In the 70s, one of the biggest oil companies in the world began studying the effects of fossil fuel emissions on the climate. They even had a team of in-house scientists that were studying and predicting global warming trends. The predictions made in the 70s actually align really closely with what we've seen in recent years. This large company, Exxon, has funded a lot of deceptive and propaganda campaigns to deceive the public. They've used insidious tactics to cover up their research. We wouldn't be in near as much danger if Exxon had sounded that alarm in the 70s. If we had begun to reduce emissions and try to find other energy sources 50 years ago, we'll soon live outside of the human climate range. That looks like droughts, unbearable heat, loss of access to the most basic of human needs. More than 2 billion people are already experiencing unlivable situations. They have to choose between staying in their home and risking the heat and societal collapse, or seeking safer, more livable conditions in global countries. Imagine being stripped of all of your rights, your humanity, and having to choose between staying in your home, which is no longer safe for you and your family, or traveling across the world to seek asylum in a country that may choose to imprison you. It's not a choice that anyone should have to make. Remember to hit that like button. Remember to tap that sub bubble.